One superstar worked out, one superstar will not work out. If your favorite team needs a quarterback in the draft, you better start playing craps. And speaking of crap, we got Jets talk too. All that and more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it is time for Inside Coverage. Welcome to Inside Coverage, part of the Zero Blitz family, where we dive into the how and why on all things NFL. Jori Epstein, Charles Robinson, I'm Jason Fitz. You guys know the crew. We're hanging out with you every single week, as we always do, guys. We got a lot to get into over the course of the show, but first and foremost, I will at least acknowledge Yahoo is doing a big bracket challenge. I need one of us to win. Okay, the only, just for the sake of trash talking, I need one of us to have a great bracket. And I realize,
it better be you.
Look. The years that I've really studied it are the years that I'm trash, and the years that I haven't looked at it at all are the years I do okay. So, C-Rob, I have no idea what to expect, but one of us, like, we need you. Like, C-Rob, you're Yahoo. Like, you are Yahoo. So I need you to win so that we can talk all the trash.
Yeah, I'm not. You're screwed. There's no way you're winning this. There's no way. I think I picked the two in the men's bracket. I think I picked the two teams I've actually seen play this year in the final, and that's why I picked him in the final. So, yeah, not great. I'm not great in college basketball.
After I filled out my brackets, I texted our editor, Joey, and said, the thing has been done. The brackets are filled out. I do not recommend betting money on either.
Look, this is not about being smart. It's about being lucky. And all we need to do is be luckier than the Cespedes family barbecue guys, because I just want to be able to talk some talk. That's all. Like, this is simple, guys. Like, it's just us versus the rest of the world, unless Frank wins, in which case, remember, Frank, part of the Zero Blitz family, he counts too. So maybe Frank is our great hope on this. He is a betting expert for us too. So maybe Schwab is the guy that gets us all the trophy. We won't share it, but we will share all of the glory. No, I'm not actually sure there is a trophy, so we'll work with the bosses on that. Maybe we can get a trophy. All right, lots to get into.
I'm not sure there's glory.
Oh, there's glory when you win the bracket, Jori. Come on.
How about money?
Like,
shame.
Especially Jori.
Shame.
Especially Jori. Because Jori, if you went in and you had the highest grade on a test in school, like, I think we all know this. You had the highest grade on the test.
Speaking my language. Okay.
See, I'm just saying, like, we got the smartest show, so we'll figure out if that actually means anything for college basketball. I don't feel great about that. But speaking of college, we do have a little bit of college football seeping into the NFL here. Today was Caleb Williams' pro day, which means everybody's got all eyes on the presumptive first overall pick. I think at this point, knowing that the Bears have moved Justin Fields, we all know the quarterback's going to go number one. I don't think it's unfair, Jori, to say that it would be fairly shocking if that's not Caleb, right?
It's not unfair to say it would be fairly. We got a lot of fair going on there.
You're welcome.
Yes, I think it would be pretty shocking if Caleb doesn't go number one. And if you want to know about the Bears' level of interest in Caleb Williams, look no further than head coach Matt Eberflus being on site, general manager Ryan Poles, assistant general manager Ian Cunningham, and among others. Like, they brought their whole crew down there. Although, to be fair, the idea is it would be shocking that the Bears didn't pick him. But if you're wondering whether the other top drafting teams have interest, the top personnel man for the Patriots, director of college scouting Elliot Wolf, was also featured on that NFL Plus live stream of the pro day. And for the Commanders, we saw head coach Dan Quinn, general manager Adam Peters, and offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury. So pretty much anyone who is important to the decision for the top three drafting teams was at USC today.
And Keenan Allen showed up too.
Yes, which that was interesting. And Caleb talked a little bit about that at his interview after, and he said that he and Keenan have hung out. They're friends. Keenan was playing for the Chargers in LA, and Caleb was playing for USC down there. And he talked about how he's a good guy, awesome dude to be around. He can give you a lot of knowledge. And I think right now, Caleb is saying he can give you a lot of knowledge. In a few months, we'll hear Caleb saying he is giving me a lot of knowledge.
Is there anything, C-Rob, we actually take away from, like, I don't know, and you've been around these things so often, you got a guy throwing it on air. Like, what are we going to see today that's going to change what we've already seen on tape?
I think, it's cliche on pro days to say this, but it's true. You can only hurt yourself, really. I mean, if you do well at your pro days, it's expected. You're not really doing anything that teams don't expect. They probably have an idea of what your arm strength is at that point, what passes you can make on tape, you can make on air. Obviously, you get the wind up and throw it as far as you can, throws at the end. But realistically, I think unless you're just missing everybody high, your 50 throws or 60 throws, however many you decide to do, if the script isn't challenging, there can be some negativity about that. Maybe what your interaction is with other players on the field. With Caleb, he was fine. He didn't hurt himself. There were a few, Jori can tell you there was a couple of moments where there was a little bit of inaccuracy issue at times, but nothing that doesn't happen in most pro days. I think it was probably a pretty clean experience all in all. I don't know what really you take away from this. Probably the most memorable pro day I ever went to was Jamarcus Russell's. And to this day, there are people in the personnel community who will tell you it's the best pro day they've ever been to with any quarterback because his arm was insane. I mean, he looked like it was quite possibly the best arm that the NFL had ever seen in a pro day workout. And I think he was pretty much perfect. And we all know how that turned out. He went to the wrong franchise. He had a number of things happen in his personal life. He got derailed and never recovered as a player. And, so what does a pro day really say about that he can be so perfect at a pro day and then just go off the rails as a prospect? It's more about how he engages with people and how challenging he makes the day for himself. Some quarterbacks will go, let's throw 80 passes, because I think if you have a really heavy workload, they get an idea of like how strong your arm is over an expanse of time. And if you get out there and throw it a ton, that's impressive. If there's not arm fatigue and you get a guy who's willing to go out there and throw, 60, 70, 80 times, that's pretty impressive, I think, to teams.
Right. I think if you're a scout and you're learning something new about a guy's arm talent or athleticism at the pro day, that's probably a problem for you. But I think to echo what C-Rob was saying, I talked to an NFC scout this week and he said, and I quote, "It's very rare that a guy doesn't look good. If a guy struggles, it's more alarming than anything. Everything should look perfect on air." But this is a scout who happened to be at Bo Nix's pro day, and he was saying what stuck out to him most about Bo Nix's pro day was the command he had in the huddle, not in the command when he was throwing, but the way he was talking to his receivers, the way he was explaining the routes and what he wanted to them. And so talking to that scout and then watching Caleb's pro day today, that's what I was looking like. Okay, how much is Caleb talking to these guys? How much is the quarterback's coach giving the script to the guys? Like, what's his interactions with them before or after? How is his demeanor? Does he look stressed? And one of the things that honestly stuck out the most to me was after Caleb finishes, he gives his like perfunctory hugs, handshakes, etc. to the Bears, all the NFL people. And then he comes back with his guys and you see, I think it must have been an offensive lineman just jump on his back from behind. You see him literally wrestle another guy. I believe it was the center. He's got handshakes with this guy. He's doing that whole like jump and hit you on the, like, what do you even describe that? Like when you jump in the air and the sides of your body touch, like, how do you describe that?
Not like that.
Jori, when I jump in the air, I'm not, I think you've described it perfect. Everybody knows what you're describing. I think problem is I can't keep enough time in air.
The airborne shoulder bump that's slightly better than my first chance. I'll just keep going until I get it right. But I thought that was really notable because it was so clear that he had like individual handshakes, inside jokes, etc. with his teammates, which I care about. And then the last thing I'll say is when he does the interview after, and Steve Weiss with NFL Network asked, like, what'd you think about your workout? We knew you were going to do about 50 throws, a lot of work in the pocket. And he said, I missed a couple of the deep balls, and there were one or two. I think it was one where it was behind my receiver. And then he stopped. He didn't say, but I thought I did a good job, or like, but overall it went well. And I think if you're an NFL team, I know it sounds cliche, but teams love that awareness of what you did. He's remembering it afterwards. He's got the recall. I don't know if C-Rob is fixing his hat or if he's like, oh my gosh, what is she saying?
No, I was just fixing it.
No, he's making sure the fit looks good. And it does.
Yeah, you look great.
Happy opening day.
Crushing it, dapper. But he was pointing out what he did wrong in specifics. And I think that when you talk about a guy and the potential for growth he has in the NFL, that self-awareness and that ability to acknowledge and own what didn't go right is important. And so I don't say that because I think the pro day didn't go well. I think it went well, but I think that most guys aren't going to be perfect on their pro day, and Caleb was aware of where there was room for growth.
Yeah, this is so interesting to me, guys, because the quarterback, and we're going to talk a lot about quarterbacks later in the show. The quarterbacks this year, there are so many of them that everybody's desperately trying to find. And so there's going to be a ton of analysis. C-Rob, the one thing I'd say I'll go all the way back to Jamarcus. Obviously, as a fan, I watched all that. And at the time, I kept saying, look, At that age, if you'd have handed me $30 million fully guaranteed, I probably would have wrecked my life too. Like, not everybody's positioned to be able to handle the money. Not everybody's positioned to be able to handle the pressure that comes with it. Talking to Baker at the Super Bowl, he made it very clear that when he first came into the league, the pressure of being everything to a franchise was a lot for him. And so I think that's the hardest part, is that we can watch guys throw, but through it all, like, trying to figure out how quickly they process, how quickly they figure out what they see on the field, and then just figuring out as human beings how they're going to handle that pressure. I don't know that anything helps with that. And that's the variable that ultimately C-Rob so often determines success or failure.
Yeah, I think, well, that's why it's so important to make sure you're doing the deep dive on a quarterback in a way that matters. And it's interesting because we'll get to this when we talk a little bit later about the whole idea that taking a quarterback is a crapshoot. But when you go back to that 2021 class, which was the top three are Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, I think 11th was Fields and 15th was Mac Jones. And when you talk to people about why 4/5 of this class really went awry, some people will tell you, that was the COVID year. Like, we didn't have as good a work, particularly on the deep dive stuff, the mental stuff, the getting on campus and, meeting other people. We weren't able to really go through that full fleshed out process with these guys where we start to understand their mentality, and you try to make it up in the process, like on Zooms and stuff. It's just not the same. And so you'll actually hear some people blame that in that class on the inability to go out and understand what is this person like mentally, who do they lean on, who are the touchstones in their life when they move on to the next level that are going to be around, those types of things. And like Jamarcus, one of the things with Jamarcus, he lost someone that was close to him. He had an uncle he was very, very close to, and he passed away. And I think that really had a huge impact on him, as you said, at that age, having that money, all that pressure, and then you lose somebody in your life who has significant gravity. Those are the things that you're not going to see when you see somebody throw it 50, 60 times scripted. So pro days are nice. They're interesting to go to. It gives people an opportunity to get out and get on campus and, sneak around the building a little bit and talk to some different individuals, and then just sort of see how a player presents himself. But, as Jori said, it's more about making sure you don't do the wrong things than just the right things.
And the other notable thing is, according to the NFL Network broadcast, the Bears already took Caleb to dinner this week. And so when you talk about a team that wanted to have him in early, or they wanted to have him in before they traded Justin Fields,
right,
and ultimately Caleb, and it seems his father decided that wasn't what was going to happen, for them to actually have that extended meal with him, I mean, that's important for them.
So you guys have mentioned that there's so little to gain from a pro day in so many ways, which is significant, because Marvin Harrison Jr., who some are saying is one of, if not the best wide receiver we've ever seen.
Different position.
But Marvin Harrison Jr. has elected not to work. He's not going to participate in pro day at all for Ohio State. So remember, he didn't participate at the combine. He's not participating now with the Ohio State pro day. C-Rob, is this a big deal?
Everybody's going to be pissed. We're not allowed to say this anymore. Everybody can do whatever they want and, screw the system and how it's set up and just watch the tape, and that should be enough. I don't agree with that. Okay. I think you can pick and choose. Like, okay, if you don't want to do it at the combine, that's fine, but you got to do it at your pro day. Like, what you're not doing in one spot, I think it's productive for you to do it in another. Maybe you don't have to do everything, but to do nothing. Okay. And I think here's my issue with this now. Marvin Harrison Jr. has not run a 40. He hasn't done a vert. He hasn't done a 3-cone. He hasn't run a gauntlet. He hasn't. And everyone's going to say, well, just look at the film. Just look at the film. That's fine. I understand that. A film is a massive component. But I still think it's important for some of the drill work to be done for the analytics of it. We all talk about how analytics is important. I think that you want to give them a data set that they can then sit down and go, okay, he's in the 98th percentile in this. No player at this position has ever been less than X at the 98th percentile, given the rest of his package, given his tape and all these different things. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a red flag, and I think it's a red flag considering that maybe he's got a guarantee, right? You think maybe the agent's already been told by the Cardinals or whoever, you're not going below us. You're locked in. Don't do anything. We're taking you. Okay, Malik Neighbors is going to run, right? As far as I know, he's going to go during the LSU workout, and he's going to run. He's going to do the agility drills and stuff. Malik Neighbors is a really damn good player. And there are people in the personnel community who believe Malik Neighbors is actually a better prospect than Marvin Harrison Jr. We've just been waiting on Marvin Harrison Jr. for so long and become so infatuated with him for all these, reasons. He goes on the field and he plays at a star, level for years. That's understandable, but that doesn't mean there's not competition in the class. Maybe he doesn't care about that. We'll see how this all turns out. Okay. And if he comes into the league and he's a star and he's an all-pro player or whatever, nobody's going to care. But I can tell you this, if he comes in and, hey, all of a sudden you're realizing maybe he does run a 4.6 40 and it shows up a little more in the NFL level where everybody's running with is faster than the guys he was playing against in the Big Ten. Maybe he's, not as clean a catcher as everybody thinks. Maybe there's just certain things that start to pop out on the NFL level. People are going to look back at this process and they're going to go, that's why we got to have even the most polished players. We got to have them going through the process so that we can see them up close and start to add that to the rest of the data set. That's my only problem with it. Again, if he stars, no one's going to give a shit. But if he doesn't, this is going to get picked apart. The fact that he literally did nothing for nobody. And I know nobody cares about this either. I don't know when the last time was he talked to any reporters either, right? No one's asked him any questions. Like, I care about that. We care about that. Probably fans don't care. But I also think that's an important part of the process as well, because his dad's a Hall of Famer, also had a track record of not wanting to speak to the media or just bristling. I'm curious if that is also what his profile is going to be like at the next level.
C-Rob, do you think that if somehow Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't the first receiver off the board, that it's for sure Neighbors, or does Rome Odunze have a chance to? I was talking again to Scout and about asking him something I had heard, and I'm like, hey, I heard Rome was doing this and this and this, and some each teams, do you know? And he said, I don't know about that in particular, but it sounds like Rome always doing everything extra, which when I hear that kind of sounds the opposite of what we're saying Marvin's doing right now. Do you think it's like three-way? Is it really one way, or are they 2A and 2B?
I think Marvin and Malik, to me, when I've taught, and we're starting to do all these calls for the all juice team, I think they're considered on that top tier of wide receivers. And like Odunze's very, very close, but not quite on their level. Now, I don't know if that will change over time. I can tell you that when we were at the Combine, probably the one, and we didn't get a chance to talk to Marvin Harrison, but Odunze was so impressive. Like, I mean, just his charisma, the thoughtfulness he had when he answered questions. There were times where he even challenged like reporters, like not in like a combative way, but just sort of like, hey, I'm interacting, I'm paying attention here, I'm using my brain and not just reading in my mind off a script that my agent taught me. I thought he was great. And I thought, this is a guy who's going to end up sitting in these meeting rooms, and it'll be that gravitational experience where people will get sucked in and they'll get closer to him sitting in that chair, asking him questions, because that's just kind of the charisma that he brings to the table. So, but in terms of the athletic profile, I think Neighbors just showcased so much last year at LSU. And it wasn't just last year. He's got a deep resume like Marvin Harrison Jr. does. I think they're seen as such prolific players, and they played and particularly LSU, you played high-level defenses in the SEC constantly. There are a lot of weapons at LSU. Brian Thomas is another guy that's probably going to go in the first round in terms of a wide receiver. But, Neighbors was matched up against the best corners in the country and was a prolific player. So I do think they're close. I do not think I would be shocked if Neighbors were to somehow get himself to wide receiver one over Harrison.
The fact that they're close is part of why this is an important conversation. Also, two things that you've said, Rob, that I think are important here. One, you're right. Fans aren't going to care that he's not talking to the media unless he doesn't work out. Like, if he's a successful player, fans don't care about anything. Right. If for some reason Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't great, then fans are going to look at all of this and say, well, why didn't you tell us? Why wasn't a red flag? So that's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I do think there's an important pushback that I would give to the world that says he can do whatever he wants. You're right. In a player empowerment world, if he doesn't want to work out, he has that right. If a GM or a scout from a team isn't comfortable with that, they have that right also to say, man, you're great, and I think your film's great, but I just want to be able to see these things that I'm used to seeing. And I don't think, that's asking too much. Understanding that if a team decides to pass on him simply because they're not comfortable not having had these things, just as he has the right to not work out, I think that does give a team the right, should they look at him and say, hey, you know what, I think you're great, but you didn't want to do these things, and that makes me uncomfortable. So for that reason, there's another wide receiver here almost as good or as good. I'm going to go with something I feel more comfortable with.
He will be the rare player. I will bet you it won't matter. We'll say all this, and I know I'm like, everything that I've just said, it makes it sound like, I'm just bullshit. He's so good. It's not going to matter unless he's not still a great player on the NFL level. That's when I think it. But going into the process, one general manager I talked to was like, I don't care. Like, he's like, we don't set it up great for him anyway. He kind of ran through the process at the combine, and he's like. And then another GM, and I thought it was astute. He's like, been staring at the guy forever. He can only go down. Like, at this point, like, there is an element of overexposure that can happen with him, that he's so perfect. We start to look for anything that's not perfect. And like, one of the things he said is, say he runs a 4.5, right? We watch him on tape. He's running away from guys. Like, that 4.5 is fast. He's running football fast. So that 4.5 translates to being super fast on the football field. But we looked at all these wide receivers, and, Xavier Worthy runs a 4.21, and then you got all these guys running 4.3s, low 4.3s, mid 4.3s. And then say Marvin gets out there and he runs like a 4.52. Are we going to be like, oh my gosh, like, man, that's just in this group. Wow. He now look at the wide receiver speed group. He's near the bottom. That's not great, So like Puka Nacua, right? What did Puka Nacua run? Like a 4.62 at the combine? Like, I think he ran like the low 4.6s. There were other things too that obviously caused him to drop in the draft, but he was perfect in the gauntlet. Probably should have paid closer attention to that than we ultimately did. And he was super fast while being perfect in the gauntlet.
No, it's such a good question. I'm working on some reporting right now about gauntlet 40. What do we actually think is the best predictor of gameplay speed? And I think what's interesting is, had a scout tell me, like, it depends what you're looking for. Like, are you looking for the guy to be the straight line, take the top off the defense? Or are you looking for him to make that contested catch? And so I kind of liked that nuance of, it's not that the 40 is outdated. It's just, who are you trying to look at it for? The one thing I do wonder is, I think you make really good points about why Marvin Harrison Jr. has more to lose than to gain by running the 40 and doing other drills. But I do think, going back to what you were saying about the data, it's interesting because a lot of teams will use some of these measurements as their starting point for player development, and saying like, hey, because we have this benchmark and because we understand what worked for players who had similar measurements, here's how we go. So if you're those teams, do you want, I get you can't make him do it before you draft him, but do you want him to show up and do a gauntlet drill and do some of these things just so you have an understanding of what he most needs to work on, or what's going to be the best use of his time in OTAs and training camp?
What if you always want to have the full workout profile of all the elite players, right? Like, I would want to have that. I would want to know what I love Marvin Harrison, Jr. as a professional athlete. He's an amazing player. Let me look at his athletic profile, and now that's a benchmark maybe for some other players that I'm comparing to. Or I'm trying to make a decision down the line 5, 6, 10 years from now between two wide receivers. And one of them compares really favorably to Marvin Harrison Jr.'s athletic profile and the tape. And the other doesn't, but the tape's great. But the athletic profile, maybe that helps you to make a decision between those two. I just think I don't know. It's just frustrating to me. There is an element of it being a job interview, and not everybody is Matt Damon and you can just walk in, or Will Hunting, right? Not everybody's Will Hunting and can just walk in and do the math and say, screw you, you're going to offer me the job no matter what. I don't even think Marvin, falls into that category. And also, come on, there were a lot of great players still went through the process, right? It's bothersome. And, Jane Daniels just deciding at the combine, I'm not going to even show up to weights and measures. I'm like, dude, you're not even going to let people figure out how tall you are yet, or how much you really weigh right now. Or,
And on that note, again, do I think Caleb Williams is going to go number one? Yes. Do I think he's probably going to have a great NFL career? I do think so. But when he didn't do all the medical evaluations at the combine, I had a top personnel guy at a team who's drafted in the second half of the first round tell me, look at this Trey Lance situation. Like, if something happens like that where he doesn't pan out and we don't have the baseline medical from a few years ago, how do you then feel as comfortable going to get him? Like, if you want that second chance of your career, like there is some degree. A lot of this is outdated. It's also the way the system works, and there can be consequences if things don't pan out. But you've got a couple guys who are at the top and who are in a good enough place now that it's not going to impact when they get drafted. It just might impact what happens in years 3, 4, or 5 of their career.
Speaking of the draft, when we come back, why drafting a quarterback might be a total crapshoot, and one wide receiver that was recently drafted that just got paid. The question is why? We'll do that next. All right, before we get into quarterback crapshoots, guys, a little bit of news here on wide receivers. We were just talking about the wide receivers that are about to get drafted. Jerry Jeudy got traded to the Browns. That in and of itself, I don't think shocking, as the Broncos continue to just dismantle and start a rebuild. But I was a little surprised. A 3-year extension worth up to $58 million for Jerry Jeudy, who's been fine. But I don't think that there's been some element, C-Rob, of like, oh my God, like people haven't been flocking to the streets to praise Jerry Jeudy. It felt like a lot of money.
Well, he hasn't put together a full season, right? We've yet to see him on the field for an entire season and to see him actually reach what the potential could be. You know, you can still see it. It still flashes. He'll still have, a run of games where like, okay, it looks like he's turning a corner. And I think part of the reason, though, for the Browns, it can be wide receiver money. You know, it's high wide receiver 2 money, depending on how it works out. It could work its way into wide receiver 1 money. I think what the Browns are doing is they're trying to layer positions moving forward, knowing that, we might not be able to get to a price on an extension with Amari Cooper. He's going into free agency next offseason. So we have our built-in wide receiver 1. If Amari Cooper, we're going to go ahead and let him go. We have an in-house answer who can bump up on the wide receiver chart. I guess initially when I saw the money, I was like, okay, wow. You give up some assets and then you pay the guy on top of it. I kind of wondered when they trade for Amari Cooper. I was like, man, I don't know. I respect Andrew Berry, the general manager there. I don't know if I would want to take on this contract. But Andrew Berry was like, that contract's going to look pretty good. Just wait. He's like, just give it some time. And then Amari Cooper played, and I'm like, wow, okay, no, he's still got some juice. He's clearly their wide receiver 1. Very good player. And then all of a sudden the contract got completely, lapped over and over and over again. And you're like, geez, now it's like low wide receiver money, that they're paying this guy. So I think there's an element of financially trying to get ahead of the pace there. And then I think trying to get ahead of sort of where the roster's going, because right now their top 4, we're talking about Amari Cooper. We're talking about Elijah Moore. We're talking about Charles Tillman. Well, Amari Cooper could be gone. Elijah Moore could be gone. We're talking about next offseason. Like, these guys could both be off the roster. That means you got Jerry Jeudy. It means you got Charles Tillman. I think there's someone else I'm missing in that wide receiver mix. But, I think they're just saying we got to stay ahead of the curve here. And if we're paying our wide receiver 1 a little less than what we're paying Amari Cooper right now, next year, that helps us with the Deshaun Watson contract, obviously, gives us a little more cap flexibility. So I understand it, but in terms of people scratching their heads, I also understand that Jerry Jeudy has never been a complete player thus far in the NFL and hasn't even completed a full season. So it's troubling. I would say there's no doubt that's a little troubling that he has not yet reached his ceiling, and this is now he's getting a shot in a second spot to reach it.
Yeah, I think what's challenging about contracts like these is, are you betting on the potential of what can happen with the right system, the right quarterback, the right guys around him, or are you betting on here's what he's already done with the production? And so the people in the building who I talked to in Cleveland who did agree with this contract were like, look, you can say Mike Evans is your guy. Well, he's 30 years old. Clearly he's produced, but he's 30 years old. Calvin Ridley's 29 years old. He's 5 years right now older than Jerry Jeudy. And so Cleveland's banking on the fact that he hasn't hit that yet, that all of the instability and craziness in Denver at the quarterback level, at the head coach level, at the offensive line injuries level, all of that were factors in why Jerry Jeudy hasn't hit it yet. And then like C-Rob was saying, like the numbers are only going to keep going up, which is why it still baffles me that the Cowboys aren't being like, please, CD, take all of our money. And the line I most liked from this person I was talking to in the Cleveland building was, Michael Pittman just got $23.3 million per year. These are scary times.
Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, like that's what it is. It's like all of these guys are getting really big money. The salary cap's going to keep going up, and there will be certain positions that go up at a higher rate than the cap does at a whole. And quarterback, receiver, and edge rusher are the top three in that regard.
And look at, Ridley. Ridley got a ton of money. I think it's like the low end wide receiver money, and especially like wide receiver one money, is going to be 21, 22, $23 million. Like that's where we're headed. And there's the high end wide receiver one money. It's going to be 30, 31, like where we'll see where CD ends up taking it in terms of that depth chart. If let's say Elijah Moore puts together a solid season, enough so that they want to extend him. I think he's 24 this year. I think he might turn 25 by next season. Mari Cooper's going to be in his beyond his 30th birthday next season. If Jeudy works out and can potentially slide to 1, and Elijah Moore is serviceable enough to, let's say, be wide receiver 2, and you can sign him to an extension, now you have 2 mid-20s wide receivers at the top of your depth chart, paid at not this massive high clip that other players are elsewhere. And then what do you direct the money to the offensive line. You figure out, are we going to do another deal with Deshaun Watson and maybe try not to back ourselves in too deep a corner in the next one? I get it. They're getting ahead of things. It's just got to work out for Jeudy in this spot.
Before we move on, all I'll say is that I'll never forget talking to Max Crosby years ago, and I asked him about where he was drafted, and he said the league never forgets the number that was next to your name. And as we talked, he said, if you're a mid-round pick and you excel the whole life, your whole career, people will be like, yeah, and he was a late pick. And if you're a high pick and you don't excel your whole career, people will make excuses for it. I'm not saying that there aren't reasons Jerry Jeudy hasn't been successful. I'm just saying, if I covered the draft the year he was picked, we all knew the route running that everybody talked about. Like the benefit of the doubt that's given to high round draft picks is absolutely insane to me. If Jerry Jeudy had been picked in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round with the exact same production that he's had, I don't believe he would get that contract. Doesn't mean it won't work. It just speaks to the benefit of the doubt.
No question. Right. Look at quarterbacks, first round quarterbacks, right? You'll give first round quarterbacks
Sam Darnold
shot after shot after shot, and after you're done giving them starting shots, they'll be backups. Somebody thought they were the cream
of the crop. There must be a reason.
Yeah, no, you get drafted in the first round as a quarterback. I'd be curious. I've never done it, but I bet if you went back and you really crunched the data of like the average lifespan of every single first round quarterback, and then compare it to second round quarterbacks, third round quarterbacks, I bet you it's shocking how much longer first round quarterbacks stick in the league. And it's because of exactly what you said, Fitz. Someone is, and Jori, you're sitting there staring at this guy going, well, it didn't work there, but maybe we have the ones that, we can draw it out, or sometimes it just looks better to start a first round. You don't have any quarterback options. What do? You go and get someone who used to be a starter, who was a high first round draft pick, who Jori said his name, Sam Darnold. And it's nicer to dress it up that way than to bring in, Tyrod Taylor, right? Like I will bet you there are some people out there who will go, I'd rather have Sam Darnold as my starting quarterback than Tyrod Taylor.
And to be clear, I'm not trying to knock Sam Darnold because he was absolutely delightful Super Bowl week and very helpful for my stories. And there was one time when the interviews were over and he could have left and he stayed, and I really appreciated it. And I told him a couple days later and he was like, that would have been so rude if I left. And I'm like, but people do that all the time. So I'm not trying to knock him. I'm just saying he is clearly someone who has not yet reached his potential in the first round and is getting another opportunity.
Stuffing is overrated at Thanksgiving. He says, he literally one time said stuffing is trash. I'm like, you got to be out of here. Fitz, don't.
I don't know.
Fitz.
I don't know that he's totally. I mean, stuffing's fine. It's fine. Okay. Before we get wildly off the rails, pie is trash. Stuffing is fine. Mike Williams, not trash. He signed a $15 million contract for 1 year with the Jets, and so he heads to the Jets. And I want to be fair here. Let's just talk about the Jets for a second, but not in the same way that we did so much during the regular season that we all just wanted to throw up in the bag. This is not about Aaron Rodgers. I'm just asking, as much as we were sitting here a year ago saying, Jets, they've made some moves that have addressed some of their weaknesses. Like, are we sleeping a little bit on the Jets?
Tyron Smith was a great pickup for
them. That's the one.
And they're not paying him insane money. I'm well aware of every Cowboys fan on Twitter who doesn't like his health history, but he was healthy last year and he was playing at a high level last year. And that was a dart worth throwing, a chance worth taking. Like, that was a smart move.
Well, Jori, look how they did the contract. I mean, this contract, it's a 1-year deal. It can be worth a lot, but it's all tied to how much he plays. So if he's healthy and he plays games, he's going to get paid. And I think, personally, when he's been healthy and been on the field, I think he's been a very good player. He's much better than what they've had to deal with at the tackle spots for quite a few years now. So Mike Williams aside, yeah, to me, that was the big one where I'm like, okay, they really needed a building block and someone who I think not only is he the anchor on that line, but he can be a leader amongst that group. And I think they're going to continue to add to that group. I think you will see in the draft that will add to that group. Mike, in a way, I think like Mike Williams, I think there was a possibility that they might have gone wide receiver if they could have angled and gotten the right wide receiver in the first round of this draft. Now I think Mike Williams probably, you don't need it as much. So it opens up some flexibility for him. They're all in. There's no question about that. Who was the GM? I'm losing my mind right now. Who's talking about making a move. And he said, if it works out, nobody cares. And if it doesn't work out, I won't be here.
Bills.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that's the same mentality. If this all works out, nobody's going to care what money they devoted or who they brought in or what the deals look like. If it doesn't work out, everybody there's going to be fired after the season. So.
And the other move that I think we should not underrate is the signing of Tyrod Taylor, because backup quarterback Zach Wilson versus Tyrod Taylor, that's a huge upgrade. And look, they need Aaron Rodgers to play if they want to go like super far, really chase the playoff goals they want. But they don't need Aaron Rodgers necessarily to be healthy for 17 games to do that. It would be preferred, and he has a pretty good health record in this league. But if he has like 3 or 4 games, something happens, they want to give him a couple extra weeks. Like, let's say I remember a couple years ago, Dak tweaked his calf. There was a game. And then, or there was the bye, and then he went into the bye week, and then he had the Vikings game coming out. And they're like, you know what? If we could have 2 straight weeks of him not doing anything, because one was going to be the bye and the next one was going to be Vikings, like, that's worth it. Put Cooper Rush in. And I would feel way better about putting Tyrod Taylor in for that type of game to give Aaron a little bit of more time at this age, coming off an injury, with Tyrod Taylor than Zach Wilson. So I think
it's a high level backup. Yeah, they learned, right?
I mean, that's a couple
I just love
games.
the fact, by the way, like, we forget that Cooper Rush for that limited time was just good enough that there were Cowboys fans out there that were like, we don't need Dak, we have Cooper. I just want to remind everybody of that insanity. And also, I love what you said, C-Rob, about the draft, frankly, because I do think it gives the Jets a ton of flexibility. And if they do go offensive line at 10, which would make sense, there's great players out there, they don't need to necessarily plug and play somebody right away. They can bring them. Like, this feels like smart long-term building while you're also addressing short-term needs. So I've been tough on the Jets repeatedly since they signed Aaron Rodgers. I just think they've had a pretty good little off season here. Speaking of the draft, by the way, C-Rob, you've done some really good work out there out on Yahoo Sports. Check out the writing on it about the draft. And, as a fan of a team that's obsessed with needing a quarterback, I read it and my heart sunk, because it's a reminder to everybody that picking a quarterback is what every fan base wants to do. But as you pointed out over the last couple of weeks, or last couple of years, I should say, picking a quarterback has not necessarily led to any success at getting the right guy.
Well, especially, I mean, it's going to be a bumper crop quarterback year, right? I mean, that's what it looks like. It's top 3 picks are going to be, I'm sure Caleb goes 1. Then you're going to have Jaden Daniels, Drake May, some combination of those two. JJ McCarthy, potentially 4 if the Vikings were to move. I think if the Vikings move up, they're moving up for JJ McCarthy, and it would only make sense to move up to 4, because then you're ensuring yourself JJ or one of the other 3 quarterbacks, if you like all 3 of those other quarterbacks who could go ahead of him, or maybe crazy. I mean, we'll see. Maybe JJ goes off earlier than we think, and Drake May sitting there at 4. But okay, you get beyond those 3-4 players. I said to Jori, we're at the combine, or I don't know if I brought it up to you at the combine. Maybe it was Nate Tice. I think I mentioned it too. The Raiders really like Michael Penix, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm like,
you mentioned this.
Yeah. And I'm like, so I'm going around the combine like, is this like first round? Like, do they like him in the first? Like, is this beyond the first? And so I start to ask other personnel people, and they're asking me the same question. They're like they like him in the first? And I'm like, nah, couldn't be. Now I see Daniel Jeremiah is mocking him at 13 to the Raiders. And I'm like, wow, okay, maybe they really do like him that much. So that would be 5, right? 5 quarterbacks. I assume Bo Nix isn't going to squeak into the first round, but maybe he does. And you're sitting there and you're staring at the position. And you're going, my God, what a year for quarterbacks. But I brought it up earlier in the show, that 2021 draft where we saw, 5 players come off in the first 15 picks. And this offseason has been horrendous when we look back at that class because everybody's on a different team now and everybody was dealt for, practically nothing. Even Justin Fields gets dealt to Pittsburgh for a 6th. That can become a 4. Trey Lance dealt for a 4. Zach Wilson, nobody wants him. like Mac Jones. I don't even remember what was Mac Jones dealt for. It was like a 5th, 6th. That was like in that range, right?
It was a 6th. It was a 6th.
Nothing. You're giving away all these players who are all, these top 15 picks. And even Trevor Lawrence, he's been the success story out of that class, but he has not reached the level for, a multitude of reasons. And we're coming off of an injury-riddled season. But he has not reached that superstar, absolute, generational talent ceiling that a lot of people had on him. So bear in mind, people are so excited about this draft and the quarterbacks. It's like I keep bringing up that quote from Shanahan that Jori knows so well because I think I've used it like 4 stories by now, where Shanahan's just like, until they go out there, no matter how much you like them, we have no idea whether or not the quarterbacks can make it, on the NFL level. You can love everything they do. They can play great, against your defense, practice great, all these different things. But the second they step foot on a field and there's a live NFL game playing, you have no clue whether or not that player is ultimately going to be able to make it in this league. And that's frightening when you're sitting there, all these teams that are going to be jammed up at the top of the first round, thinking, we're resolving our quarterback. Remember the class with Baker goes off 1, right? The Browns, you're thinking, we solved it. Darnold, I think, went off 3, right, to the Jets. We solved it. No, you didn't. Who am I going to leave out in this? 7, Josh Allen goes to the Bills. Okay, great. That really worked out. 10, Josh Rosen to the Arizona Cardinals. That was rough. And then Lamar goes as the last pick in the first round and says, I'm going to deliver a Super Bowl, and he's gotten close in Baltimore. So the most fascinating thing I think is everything that's dedicated to look at quarterback positions and getting it right, and teams still get it wrong. And to me, it is clearly art and not science, because I cannot explain how after all these years you can blow a quarterback pick so badly.
It's so interesting because I was asking a scout this week and I said, if I were to give you Vegas odds on every single position in you play in football, and I said, rank them from most likely to least likely to hit on, like put more, you'll win the most amount of money if you get the one you most believe that you're going to be able to hit on, where would you put quarterback? And he was like, yeah, when you put it that way, I actually feel like I could hit on a quarterback. And I was like, really? And he was more making the point that it's not that quarterback is so much harder to hit on, it's that the misses are so much more public. And I'm curious what you guys think about. Like, is it that hard? And then it also made me think it's not, I was framing it to him as how you're evaluating quarterbacks. And the idea is maybe it's not so hard to evaluate a quarterback, but I think it is, but maybe it's even harder to give the quarterback the right structure around them, the right system, the right coaching staff. And like Josh Rosen, was he unable to succeed in the NFL? Was he put in a position where he wasn't set up to succeed and not really given a runway? Like, I think it's interesting to think about these things.
But I'd say, as much as it's a combination of all of those things, I also think desperation is part of the problem here. Like, there's so many teams. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't feel like you can win.
Yep.
So what's going to happen inevitably at the end of April is you're going to see teams all over the place trade up huge to move up for a guy that they like, but do they love? Like, but you got to have somebody. So what do you do if you're sitting there? Because every fan base is saying, well, I want to trade it for Caleb, or you see I want to trade it for Jaden. But when you're talking about, hey, I'm going to give up years of draft picks if that's what it takes to get my hands on Bo Nix, our team's going to be willing to, there's somebody's going to do that. And if somebody does that, now all of a sudden we view that so differently. Like we're no longer just trading up to get Peyton Manning. We're trading up to get anybody. And it leads to this cycle that I think it leads to defeat. If you get it wrong at the quarterback position, your whole organization's set back 3 to 5 years, right? Like the bleeding never stops and everybody keeps reaching desperately to me.
Yeah. And that also though plays into what Jori was saying when she talked to the evaluator, the thing about quarterbacks, when you get it wrong, it being so public. The problem is when you have a bad quarterback, they make a lot of other people on your team bad. They can make your offensive line horrible. They can make your running game horrible. They can take all your wide receivers and render them into a junk pile, right? Whereas if you have a bad left tackle, that's bad. It's really bad to miss on a left tackle, but the whole line doesn't just fall apart just because the left tackle is bad, right? The running game doesn't just fall apart because the left tackle is bad. Literally, if your quarterback is bad, it's really hard for them, for you to facilitate everyone else around them being great, and they're terrible. I also think there's a reason why when you would put Trey Lance on the field for the 49ers, you go, I don't know, something doesn't look right. It just doesn't seem to function. And then you put Brock Purdy in and you're like, I don't know, the offense looks pretty good. It's because he's a better player. He's not facilitating poor play through other positions on that offense.
I think the thing that blows my mind though, C-Rob, because you just mentioned Penix. Over the weekend, because I do so much work with the Raiders, I asked a bunch of friends and people I know that I think are pretty plugged in and to do the draft well. I gave the scenario. What do you do if you're sitting at 13? What's the right approach for Bo Nix and Michael Penix? And to a man, every person that I talked to said they don't think Bo Nix is going to be there at 13. That was the most surprising thing to me over the weekend, is that teams are hotter on Bo Nix than we are. I don't know if that's true. I just know I'm sitting here looking around thinking, my God, are we really sitting here saying that 5 quarterbacks are going to be gone before 13? And that was the very real scenario. It's like, hey, if you want the 5th best quarterback in this year's draft, you are probably going to have to move up from 13. That just feels stupid to me. No matter how much you need a quarterback, that feels dumb.
The interesting thing, too, is if you focus this through Nix, I'm not going to say who they are, but there's like a handful of people who put out mock drafts who their board means something to me because I know they're wired. I know they're friends with GMs. They used to work on teams. I'll just look. Daniel Jeremiah is one of them, right? I mean, I know who he's friends with. I know the organizations he used to work for. When Chris Mortensen passed away, I had a former GM call me. We're having a conversation about, he was telling me how he ended up hiring Daniel Jeremiah on their staff, how they ended up hiring Daniel Jeremiah, because Mort was like, hey, this guy's a great evaluator. Could you talk to him? And that's how he ultimately broke into the NFL as an evaluator. And so when he puts out a mock draft, I'm like, I know who he's talking to. I know, and I know he's got a pretty good feel for what's going on. And like I said, there's a handful of others. What's interesting is among that group, Daniel Jeremiah doesn't have Bo Nix in his first round in his latest mock. And he's not just mocking it the way he would mock it. He's mocking it the way he thinks the players fit what the teams are looking for. Now, I can tell you there are other people I really trust with mock drafts who have Bo Nix in the top 15. So I'm like, what the hell's going on? How is there such a big separation? I could see it at any position except quarterback, right? Or except a high-end left tackle. It's so weird to see a quarterback that, as you said, you are hearing people inside an organization go, he may not be here at 13. And then someone who I know is really wired in the NFL going, I don't even have him in the first round. He's not even coming off the board in the first round.
I don't even know what to make of all of it. And the hardest part is that what do we see now is we see everybody's going to reach. And then if you don't like them in 2 years, you're just going to trade them away for peanuts. And you're just going to keep trying and trying and trying, because we're in this world right now where if you don't have a Mahomes or a Josh Allen or a Joe Burrow or a Lamar Jackson, it is very hard to feel like you have a shot if you don't have.
It's got to be a little shocking. I would love to hear from both of you on this. Think of what Joe Douglas got out of Sam Darnold. He got a second round pick. He got some picks out of Sam Darnold. That wasn't that long ago. And you can't look at like Fields, for example. Fields has talent. And not only does he have talent, the arrow's not flat on him, right? I talked about in the past, the evaluator always talked about is the arrow up, down, whatever. It might not be straight up, but it was definitely up. He got better this season. You can argue, hey, he was good against bad teams or whatever. You can slice it up, but he's not a talentless player. For you to get a sixth, and I know they said other teams were interested. I know at least one team called the Bears, and it was like the interaction was not exactly an offer, and the Bears the whole process was just really weird. But to send him to Pittsburgh for a sixth that can graduate to a fourth is not good. Like, just get the fourth. Why does it have to, if they like him and he's got the talent, it's shocking to me. You just play. I mean, Josh Rosen got a second, right? Now, granted, there were more years of control on his rookie contract and all these different things. I get that, but wow, it's wild to me that someone with as much starting experience as Fields and some success, that was the best you could come up with.
Yeah, I agree with you. If Trey Lance is going for a fourth and he did not play well and did not have much experience, and Justin Fields in some ways overcame the circumstances he was in, or definitely superseded what would be expectations relative to what he was dealing with, he should have gone for more. I do think the Bears were well aware of the leverage they did and didn't have. They had kind of showed their cards. The Steelers were aware of the leverage they had. They had Russ. They didn't need him. And then going back to what we said about Brian Burns and the difference between the offer from a year ago and now, and you just alluded to this, C-Rob, like, you got to pay Justin next year, and not top dollar, but you got to pay him something, and you might have to do that before you really need him. And so he's a high-level backup this year, very, very high-level backup. I mean, I'd have to think, but I can't imagine he's not a top 5 backup this year. And then by next year, when you're more likely to be using him, he is worth you got to pay him $25 million instead of 2, whatever it is.
I hear all of that, but we just came off a year where there were guys some Sundays playing in the NFL that we didn't even know were in the NFL, and they were starting at quarterback, right? So
right.
It's just in a talent devoid league, I think it's pretty shocking. Before we get out of here, Jori,
real quick, how much do you think the Bears cared about whether they got him out of the NFC just in case he does well?
I mean, I think they cared, That's why there was no, like, when Minnesota,
I don't know, you said
up,
another team that was calling. I'm curious if that was NFC or AFC.
It was an NFC team. It was an NFC team. So I think it does matter to them. People in that organization, there are definitely people in that organization who were of the mind that, like, we should keep him. Like, he can make it. Like, he's getting better. The locker room loves him. He's, as you said, he's kind of dealt with some bull there and didn't break, for the most part. He had some moments, but really he kept it together. And I think they also looked at Jordan Love in Green Bay and they were like, they hung on with that guy. It looked like there's no way this is going to work. I think I wrote 3 different Jordan Love stories over the course of last season where I'm like, he's going to make it. Then I was like, no, he's not going to make it. Then I was like, no, he's going to be fine. It's like every other month I'm writing a different Jordan Love story about the different direction he's headed in. And I think there's some people in the Bears organization that are like, might just be one more year away of like him getting another year with these guys, chemistry, fine tuning the scheme a little bit. And you don't want to see that happen, obviously, in the NFC and have to run up against him. There's probably a reason why, too, the Steelers traded Kenny Pickett, into the NFC, which, by the way, Kenny Pickett, that's another one where you can't just get a straight up draft pick for him. It's got to be like pick swaps and, improving draft position. Like, the guy was just a first round pick. Like, you barely scratched the surface on him, and you can't get a second out of Pickett. And he's got a couple years of rookie control.
Yeah. They might as well have just traded Pickett for the Jelly of the Month Club. All right, so, Jori, the league owners meetings are happening next week. Obviously, a lot of conversation there, but a lot about the kickoff rule right now. You think anything like massive is going to happen? Are we going to see huge change in your mind, Jori?
Yeah, I think we're going to change the kickoff rule. I would say the kickoff rule and the hip drop tackle elimination are the 2 I most expect to go through and be passed. I think there are several reasons. One, if you're paying attention to the rhetoric of the league dating back to as early as at least last year, and the data that the league starts bringing to our press conferences on why it makes sense and why they believe it, I think that tends to be pretty telling of like, hey, all of these really high profile guys whose injuries came on a hip drop tackle, look at them. Like, then that the league is really pushing momentum. And the other thing is, we got this 45-page document from the league that the league is sending out to team ownership today. And it has all of the rule proposals, what they're going to be voting on, and who submitted the proposal and why. And so everyone who submits it, and you have some of them that are from a certain team, and then others that are from the competition committee and the health and safety committee. And I would be willing to wager that those are the ones that tend to have more steam, because the competition committee and health and safety committee bring it because the league wants it and needs it. Ownership wants it and needs it. Wow, we got a thumbs up on the screen. Look at that. And they've already basically done the lobbying for it. And so I think those are the two that I most expect.
When teams put a rule, when it's always a team sponsoring it, I swear it's such a fest with other teams. They're like, oh, they just want that because, they all think it's some team trying to game the system only for their benefit. And I feel like there's always it's a tougher task to get something passed when you can't, funnel it through the competition committee or, as you said, the health and safety. But I agree with that. I think that's absolutely right. Those rule change suggestions are much more, I think, data driven and thought out, and they usually do pass. Kickoffs are going to be weird. I mean, I saw the setup. So it looks so odd.
I covered it with the XFL at the time, and I actually really ended up liking it. Like, I thought the kickoff was fine. The only thing weird is that the onside kick portion of it, now you have to announce it. You would have to announce it because it requires a different formation.
Yeah.
If they're going to do it, I wish they would also bring in the onside kick from the XFL, which was the onside kick from the XFL was a 4th and 15. So you had to convert a 4th and 15 from your own 35. So the way the kickoff works, by the way, the kicker kicks from the 35-yard line. The other 10 players line up the receiving team's 40-yard line. They line up in a setup zone, basically. So they're separating. You're not getting as much of a running head start is essentially what this comes down to. So you don't have guys barreling down the field 50 or 60 yards to then, essentially try to decapitate.
It's like 10 yards in contact, right? I mean, it's literally just
right. They're 10 yards apart.
All I know is conceptually hearing it. It wasn't until I actually saw the X's on like a field layout, and I was like, oh my God, that looks so weird. Like, just the way it's set up. I'm like, this is going to be such an awkward thing to watch. And I never saw it in the XFL. It took a minute. I never watched it in the XFL. So maybe I need to just go back. And it's not an exact 1-for-1, right? Like there are some differences between, I think, how the NFL is doing it and the XFL did it. I think there are a couple little wrinkles that I'm not totally familiar with right now.
Yeah, I think it is. It follows the structure and philosophy with a slight shift in where the players are aligned. So in the XFL, they were further downfield. They're trying to figure out health and safety. Like, is the kickoff just going to end up going away, though? I mean, like,
some people
if that's
think
the inevitability of it, just do it. Like, if it's just going to go, then just rip off the Band-Aid at this point, right?
I think they're trying to save it. Like, if they just want it to go away, they wouldn't try this version.
Right. No, they're clearly trying to save it. There's a lot of jobs. I mean, that's a lot of. It's just a lot to take away.
I never thought of that. That's a really, like, there's a lot of special teams guys
coaches. It's also so many coaches will say, if a guy's going to make the roster and he's not like your automatic star, I need him to be able to do two things.
Yeah,
and that could be two things like a blocking, catching, whatever. But most of them, at least one of the two are special teams. And that is a huge predictor of the bottoms of the 53/55 man rosters and also of the game day active rosters. And so it's basically, especially when you talk about how little of a developmental league the NFL has compared to so many of the other professional leagues, in some ways, special teams are that chance for guys to have jobs, get around the building, keep developing physically and in their football IQ and scheme, and do it on special teams.
Like John Harbaugh was a special teams coach, right? And he becomes a head coach. And I know that, there will be teams that they will take, especially some of the really younger staffers, assistants that don't just have a straight line assistant job. Maybe they'll be, they help with the passing game coordination or whatever, and they don't really have a title. Sometimes they'll stick them with the special teams coordinators for a year because they get to know more of the players. They get to know, offense, defense. They're just more knowledgeable about how the team is working, the players and the strengths and weaknesses. It's a very well-rounded experience for people who spend a year on a special teams staff. and they don't have to be the coordinator either. And then they can go back to what other specific positions they are on offense or defense. And you'd be taking that away. If you don't have, I guess technically you'd still have kicking, right? But if you take away the kickoff, you'd still have punting. So I guess you wouldn't completely take it away, but whatever the case, you can't get rid of the kick. It would suck if you get rid of the kickoff.
And just as I'm sitting here saying I like the XFL version of it, I just found out in this quick moment of reading that with the new merger of the XFL and the USFL into the UFL, they trashed it and went back to the NFL kickoff version. So apparently they didn't like it as much as I did. That's what we've learned. They've abandoned it. All right. You guys should never abandon us. We're obviously hanging out with you every single week. I'll be back Monday with Zero Blitz. Follow us all on social media. Most importantly, C-Rob, tell everybody how we can continue to support the incredible legacy of Terez Paylor.
Yeah, check out breakingtea.com/Terez for your all juice tee or hoodie. Remember that the proceeds from that purchase go to support the Terez Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can also contribute directly to that scholarship or the one in his name at Missouri if you check out our podcast description. And the All Juice team, the 2024 All Juice team will be coming in April, so keep an eye out.
While you're checking out that podcast description, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, family, enemies, and everybody to hang out with us every single week. We'll be back Thursday with more inside coverage. Be sure to get out to Yahoo and check out the bracket challenge, by the way. You can win $25,000. Get out there, yahoo.com/tourney. See how we did. It's going to go swimmingly. We will be the champions. Hang out with us next week.
I feel like we can't all be the champions.
We can't all be champions.
If the show wins, we all win.
You're lying,
if the show wins,
Fitz.
we all
You're
win.
lying.